Alright, let's talk about the Drow. Hello everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. We are looking at changing up another fantasy race and their culture, and today we are looking at the Drow. But before we get into those details, if you're new here to the channel, then go on down to hit that subscribe button and become a regular member here at the Gamer's Den. Or if you've already listed yourself on such a legendary roster, and I know you already have, you dashingly awesome people, but go on down to hit that like button and share the video far and wide. And now, let's go ahead and talk about how we change things up for the Drow. So, some of the things that really stand out for them, they dwell down underground, deep into the Underdark. They have a matriarchal-oriented society, meaning that women typically occupy leadership roles, and they also carry out a lot of raiding and prefer to operate through stealth. And given the unique nature of the Underdark, no real sources of natural light down there, and if there is, it's usually oriented around bioluminescence. Traditional sources of heat, such as campfires and the like, are something that are kind of a no-go, just because not only do they give you away, but they also can use up the relatively limited amounts of oxygen in certain caverns. And given that they have dark vision, they're able to see to some degree in the dark, although how it's usually been described has been seeing the different variations and gradients of heat, so they can see the difference between a living, warm-blooded being and a rock wall. So that's definitely presents some unique and interesting ideas. And so these different kinds of raids that they carry out, their methods of fighting from stealth and ambush, kind of made me think about one of the first cultures, well, at least in the U.S., that really emphasized a lot of these things were the Apache. They kind of became known for their nighttime raids and their ability to lethally carry them out, and dealing with sentries and going through and murdering, just killing the crap out of different soldiers who may have been asleep inside of a particular camp, leaving just an absolute messy nightmare for anybody else who came along and followed up through this. So the Apache, I think, are a pretty solid fit for the Drow, and the Apache open up quite a few interesting cultural ideas as well, too. So, for example, they were definitely a nomadic tribe, following the buffalo, harvesting them for their meat, bones, sinews, the hides, using the hides for shelter and the like. So you could apply this to the Drow even if they live in the Underdark, making them semi-nomadic, following the different creatures and animals and plant life that might have developed down there, and just following them along and using their hides and the like for shelter. Given that so many creatures use dark vision, having these shelters set up, their heat signature, if you want to go with that, the level of heat that they put off would not make it readily apparent that there was something inside, or at least you could work that in there somehow so their shelters blend in with the surrounding terrain in the caverns. Also, the raids that they carry out being quick, quiet, and the like, dealing with sentries, that definitely fits there as well. And also the Apache have numerous different kinds of dances, like the mountain spirit dance. They have a very strong semi-religious cultural practice of animism, recognizing different animal and nature spirits and the like, and they also have their own series of deities as well, and they have a matrilineal focused society. Although men were selected to lead different bands, when a man married in Apache culture, they lived and moved in with their wife's family, and even if his wife passed, he would stay with that family and they would help him find a new bride, usually somebody still within that family, so a sister, a cousin, depending. It just kind of depends on who and what was available at the time. And so there's all of these different interesting things that crop up, and also the Apache, because they were this loose affiliation of several different bands, they had some interesting diplomatic relations that would come up. They developed fairly close ties with the Comanche, if I remember right, and Comanche, no, the Pueblo. It was the Pueblo. And the Pueblo were definitely more settled, and they had a more agricultural lifestyle, and so they would trade back and forth with one another. The Apache bringing in meat and hides and all of those things, and exchange it for different agricultural products. So that way they could have a more diversified diet and have access to different materials as well. And so there's a pretty close-knit system of trade there, but they did have difficulty dealing with outsiders, at least as far as diplomatic things came along. So the Spanish, the United States, when both of these groups became a little bit more established in the area, because one band might make peace, another band did not, but the Spanish and the U.S. were not really all that interested or keen on learning the different distinctions between different bands, and so if one band made peace and the other one made war, they'd, as often as not, end up retaliating against the wrong band if hostilities broke out into open warfare and skirmishing. So that would present a lot of complications. But still, something interesting to bring about there and to utilize for updating and changing up the Drow, or making them just a little bit more interesting. And because there's so many different bands, they don't all necessarily have to be good or neutrally aligned or evil aligned. You can mix and match it up a little bit if you wanted to. And there's also another culture that kind of got me thinking a little bit, something that had a matriarchal leadership, or at least, one that had room for matriarchal leadership, and then also just the idea of different raids, expanding, going into more an aspect of empire, and that's the British. Why? Because the British still have the Queen, although the royal family is more of a nominally cultural, historical kind of leadership role. The crown is still fairly important, and then you have parliament and the like. Certainly in the different Salvatore books going on with Menzo Baranzin surrounding the tales and stories of Driz Do'Urden, there still is a council leadership of some of the strongest families, with the absolute pinnacle being on top. You can still substitute that in well enough with having a queen in place, and then having almost a parliamentary-ish sort of setup where the crown has a degree of influence over proceedings, and then the parliamentary leadership also weighs in and casts their votes and makes their decisions to help further expand the Drow Empire through the Underdark and out above. The other thing with the British is that the British Isles, comparatively small country, especially with all these other places, and then you look at their conquest of India. Their conquest of India was absolutely bizarre and kind of strange how it shook out the way it did, because the British, a lot of people think of the British as being the technologically advanced and superior group of people, and that's how they conquered India. It's how they did things in China during the First Opium War. They had superior technology, firepower, and all of that, and the ability to project that strength, but not so much in India. But I definitely recommend looking into the British conquest of India. It's absolutely fascinating. The East India Company and everything, all the rise of corporations at that time. But before I go into full-on history lesson here, the point is that the British Isles, despite their size, they had an ability to project their strength through their navy. While there's not a huge amount of naval capabilities possible in the Underdark, unless you want to get really creative, but that's a whole thing for another time, their ability to project strength out to build and expand their empire is something that can be very interesting for you to utilize, or at least I think it would be. That'd be pretty cool. Not just raids and taking slaves and all of that, but actually putting their forces in place to actually conquer something. attempted it with the assault on Mithril Hall, and that was ultimately the downfall of House Bainray, the strongest house in Menzoberranzan, but just make it turn out to be more of a surprisingly successful thing. As they only need to conquer a couple of places and get the resources and populace there under their control to really have a better chance at expanding out further, because now they have access to and control of surface warriors from the surface that they can use and push out to attacking other regions, and they don't have to exactly announce that they're doing so on behalf of the Drow. They just send their troops out with marching orders through the surface, begin attacking and sieging cities from above, and while that's happening, the Drow come up from below and attack from the bottom, or, the rear, and move in, and they can use their traditional means of stealth, focusing their strength in one central point, hitting with a lightning fast raid while there's a siege going on outside the city walls, town walls, whatever the case may be, wiping out leadership, opening up gates, and allowing their surface forces in through the city walls. And that's how they could expand their empire outwards from there and become a bit more of a reflection of the British Empire, where, at one point it was said that the sun never set on the British Empire because they had spread that far everywhere. But these are just two interesting options, or at least I think they're interesting. What do you think? Go on down to the comments below and let me know your thoughts. What are some ways that you have updated and changed up the Drow to make them more interesting for you and your players? We'll go ahead and engage in discussion down in the comments below. And if you liked today's video, go on down to hit that like button, or hell, even if you didn't like it, hit the dislike button and let me know. And if you're new here to the channel, go on down to hit that subscribe button and become a regular member here at the Gamers Den. But with all that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Thank you all so very much for your time, and you all have yourselves a good night.